Welcome to the Nick Halaris Show. This is the place where we explore big ideas with people having a big impact on our world. I'm your host, Nick Halaris, serial entrepreneur, author, early morning riser, and seeker of truth and wisdom. Join me as we explore the journeys and discoveries of fascinating people who are literally unlocking the secrets to creating a life of both success and fulfillment. Each episode will arm you with insights, ideas, and practical perspectives on what it takes not only to be financially and personally successful, but also how to start having authentic impact on the world around you. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nick Halaris Show. This week, we have two very special guests. We have Brigitte Canty and my good friend, Ellie Konsker. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
We're so excited to be here.
So I wanted to have these two young women on the show because they're working on something really cool, a startup company in the fashion industry called Zero. It's a cool idea in a very important space, and just want to learn more about it. So why don't we start right there with Zero? What is Zero, and what are you all trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, of course. So Zero is a membership-focused e-commerce platform for extensively vetted fashion. And when I say extensively vetted sustainable fashion, we look at the entire supply chain of each brand that's featured on our website. So in the fashion industry currently, the fashion industry has very little regard for people and the planet. And so we wanted to create standards for sustainability. Currently in the space, anyone can market themselves as sustainable. Typically, brands just pick one little piece of the supply chain and make it a little bit more environmentally friendly, but then they're able to market the entire brand as sustainable. And so we kind of wanted to fight against those greenwashing efforts in the industry.
So how does Zero work? Like when break it down for me in like the basics, like let's say I'm interested in buying some clothing that is actually sustainable. How does Zero ensure that happens?
So Zero has a similar interface to that of like Revolve or Nordstrom. So you go on the platform, there's a wide curation of clothing that you can shop on. And then where we really like to differentiate ourselves is when you click on the piece, you can actually read the story that takes you through the inception to end of life of the product. So you understand everything that went into building this piece. So in that regard, we're really trying to kind of humanize fashion and make people more aware that a shirt doesn't just end up in your closet. A shirt will travel all around the world, probably go to more places than you've been, and then end up in your closet.
Yeah, and we're really focused on the curation of the clothing on Zero because first and foremost, we want people to go to our website and just simply want to shop on it because they like the aesthetic of the pieces. And then we kind of want to pull them in through our educational aspects on our website and teach them a little bit more about consumption habits and the detriment of the fashion industry on the environment.
Interesting. And what are the components of like the standard? How did you come up with that?
We really went into it with just a very broad holistic lens. For a quick background, Ellie's background's in fashion, mine's in environmental science. So being interested in environmental science means that I'm just naturally against consumption, and I don't think that it's the answer to anything. So when we were really building out our standards, I wanted to make sure that it was the best alternative that we're providing, because or else it just really wouldn't pique my interest working on this. So what we've done is we've gone through everything. So it takes into account dyes, wastewater, living wages, where people are working, the quality of work there. So we're really trying to look into everything and make sure that it's a circular process and that it's the best alternative to what's out there.
Yeah, and to put into perspective our vetting process, when Brigitte and I first started Zero and we're kind of honing in on what makes a brand sustainable, we came up with a list of requirements that we deemed took into account everything from, like Brigitte said, wastewater, living wages, et cetera. And we vetted around 500 plus brands, and only 30 of those brands met our requirement. So it really shows like the gravity of the issue of greenwashing in the industry.
Because a big thing that what we're seeing right now is, since it's starting to be more relevant with consumers, large companies like the Gaps of the world are really putting out claims about it, but there's not a lot backing these claims. So what Ellie touched on earlier, they'll do one thing, like have a product that is 30% organic cotton, and then they'll start promoting sustainability across the entire company. But in actuality, nothing about that product is sustainable.
Even large companies like H&M, they have these conscious collections, and they're just fully greenwashing. It's insane. Like, these are the largest fast fashion brands, and they just try to get increased profits, and they do, because consumers want to shop more sustainably. So yeah, definitely trying to fight against that.
This really leans into kind of the topic of, is it the responsibility of the brand or is it the responsibility of the consumer to know? I personally think it's the responsibility of the company that's putting a product out. As a consumer, it's not my responsibility to be a sustainability expert. So that's what we're really looking to do with Zero, is just create a platform where customers know that they're not being misled. They know that we're really doing the work for them so they can shop with ease.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It reminds me of like the broader ESG. For whatever reason, the way that movement has evolved, it's been pushed down to the level of consumer choice. Like, oh, if you care about the environment, you should, buy a Prius. That's kind of how it started. And then, oh, you should buy a Tesla. And then it sounds like it's made its way into basically every industry, right?
Right. And that's really how the idea of Zero came to be. Is Bridget and I, we went to USC. We were surrounded by our consumption obsessed friends. They were buying multiple packages from various online stores. I had literal stacks of packages in front of my apartment door, just from all of my roommates. And so we wanted to create a platform with the likes of Revolve and Net-a-Porter and Essence, but one that's strictly environmentally focused.
Hey guys, this is Nick. I wanted to take a quick break from the episode to share some exciting news. In addition to the podcast, I want to make you aware of some additional content we're putting out. And best of all, it's 100% free. Our Profit Plus newsletter consists of weekly insights about what it takes to find meaning in the pursuit of modern success. This is the place where we explore big ideas at the intersection of markets, business, politics, and life, as we seek to empower our readers to have an authentic impact on the world. If you're serious about finding fulfillment amid success, then definitely check out these additional insights. Just go to subscribe.nickhalaris.com. Again, that's subscribe.nickhalaris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. So going back to the standard, it's interesting that you guys did this study. Like, remind me again, what were the factors you were looking at? It was like wastewater, wages.
So it's really
what
everything.
else is it?
We start at the beginning of the supply chain, and then we just look at every hand it comes in contact with and whatever the process is at that point in time. So obviously it's when the initial cotton's being sourced, how it's grown, is there pesticides used, whatever the fabric is, the composition of it. And then moving up the supply chain, how is it dyed? How is it packaged? How is it shipped? All those factors are taken into account so that we can really paint the whole picture of the product. Because like what I was saying, kind of with the larger companies, what they'll do is they'll look at one element of the supply chain and then use that to create an entire claim. And so what we're really looking to do is make sure the brand we're working with is as thorough as they can possibly be with every step along the supply chain.
Yeah, and there's no regulatory body within the US, and that's also something that we eventually want to get towards, is becoming that regulatory body as well. So we're seeing regulation in Europe, and we just want to get ahead of that curve and start something in the US, because we know it's eventually going to get to that point.
Okay. And so have you all produced like an actual standard, like a document that says if you want to be a sustainable fashion brand, this is what it would have to look like?
Yeah, we have our list of, it's around 100 different questions we ask a brand, but this does pose a very interesting question where it gets more granular than that. And it has to do with, since every brand is so different and every product is so different, there can't necessarily be one standard this is a gold star if you're doing it this way. So that's what's also really interesting about it, is there needs to be the human element behind it to really engage with each brand and hear them out and hear their reasoning, because it's more than just if you're checking the box.
Yeah. We are in the process of creating a document, though, that we're going to trademark for our vetting process. So I think that's really a great moat for us within our business as well.
Yeah, I feel like there was one company actually several years ago attempting to do this in real estate, which is also sort of like a incredibly fragmented industry, like you just described, Bridget, where it's every piece of real estate is kind of different. So this one company, they had some crazy backers, like celebrities like Deepak Chopra and Leonardo DiCaprio. They did a great job pulling this together and created something called the WELL standard.
Okay.
But The wall standard really didn't take off. I'm not sure why, but they were trying to do something along the lines of what your intent is in the real estate, to say like, hey, there's more to environmentally sustainable building than just like what was in LEED. Because like real estate had this other thing called LEED, and that was judging on certain metrics, but there was sort of more to it. Like, hey, do you have actually windows in your units? Like they tried to like be really holistic about it. They're making progress, but not swift progress, is from what I can tell, because I haven't seen much about it lately.
I mean, it just makes sense because all this stuff is really challenging. And going back to what I was saying, it's really hard to create one universal standard. But B Corp, in my opinion, is a really excellent example of, obviously, B Corp isn't like the most ideal in terms of with sustainability, but they're doing a pretty good job. And they've been able to work across multiple industries and really promote a lot of brands who are the best alternative. So that's someone that we're really looking to emulate with what we're doing, but have it very fashion focused, is something similar to B Corp.
And tell me about B Corp. I'm not sure I know what they do.
So B Corp basically just like certifies sustainability claims, but they'll do for like grocery stores and stuff like that. So Air One is B Corp certified, and they just kind of, once again, take a holistic lens, look at the operations of the company. It's a super thorough process. And then from there, someone can get a B Corp certification. So a lot of fashion brands can get a B Corp certification, but since it does kind of span multiple industries, it's not as granular as I think it should be for a particular industry, if that makes sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Like B Corp is just like a generalized way of signaling that you're doing something socially conscious or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so the way your guys' product works is you try to vet these fashion companies from beginning to end and really ensure it, and then they have to sell exclusively on it. Like what's the business model from there?
Yeah. So right now it's not, they don't have to sell exclusively with us, but that's definitely something after we have our first raise and we have a lot of momentum behind us, we'll start really figuring out and fine tuning the relationships as we grow with the brands. But currently it's not exclusive. However, we will also be having exclusive pieces and stuff with brands soon.
Yeah. So right now the business model is we just have a fashion take rate. So we take a commission from each brand, but eventually we really do see a lot of demand from the brand side and brands wanting to be on Zero. And so I think that they are really passionate about aligning with a company that's selling their pieces. And so I think eventually we will definitely think about doing exclusive partnerships, just because we're not really fond of brands kind of working with us and then working with other companies that don't promote sustainability.
Right. So there's like market confusion or something like that.
Another big reason why we're fundraising currently is so within our vetting process right now, it's Brigitte and I sitting down with brands and going through all of our vetting questions. But eventually we want to be able to audit factories and, get full documentation and certification.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about that earlier. Like, how would you even going about and analyzing the living wage or the wastewater? It seems like a daunting process. So how did you do that so far?
That's a question we actually receive a lot. And it's interesting because within our vetting meetings, within like the first 5 minutes, you can really tell if the founder is actually passionate about sustainability and thinks about each little button or zipper on the jacket that she creates or he creates. And so we have this one brand called Adhere to Studios, and she is extremely passionate about sustainable fashion. And she goes through each seam, where it's from, who makes it. And so I think like from a vetting perspective, you can kind of just get a vibe from the founder first and foremost. But obviously we go through all of the questions and kind of cross-reference.
And when you were looking at like the established brands, when you said you sort of like did this market survey, how did you get that information to even assess? Like, let's say, look, I'm wearing this like Nike shirt. Like, how do you see what Nike's even doing behind the curtain?
Sadly, the thing is, with a lot of those big brands, you don't even have to go behind the curtain. You can just look at like simply the fabric composition on the website and easily tell, because it will be a piece that has polyester spandex in it in a large percentage, and they'll be marketing it as sustainable. And you're like, no, polyester is not sustainable in any way, shape, or form. So sadly, you really don't have to go that deep with these brands. It doesn't even get into living wages or things like that, because you can just tell purely from what they're displaying on the website that it's not a legitimate claim.
before we have these lengthy meetings with brands, we pre-vet them and just go through their entire website and see fabric composition. We see if they have any sustainability reports, and then that will determine whether we even have a first meeting with them.
Oh, interesting. And so what's wrong with polyester?
Polyester is just not what we want to be adding into our world. Since it's a synthetic fiber, it just stays around, so it won't decompose at the end of life. It will just remain like a plastic on the planet. And so what we're really interested in is natural fibers, or fibers that already are recycled. So they're either A, will be able to decompose and go back into the land and won't end up as waste, or B, they're combating waste from the very beginning through being a recycled material or dead stock fabric or something like that.
Interesting. All right. And where are you guys at on the evolution of Zero now? Like it sounds like you're raising funds. Like how many brands are on Zero? And give me some of the numbers.
Currently, we have around 30 brands on Zero. We're looking to increase that number this year post fundraising. We're in our third week of fundraising, which has been pretty hectic, but it's been quite the experience, and we're really excited to push forward and be able to work on Zero full time and also be able to scale. So
yeah, and right now Zero as it exists is more of like a beta platform. It's not the final vision of what we want it to be. Ellie and I coded the website ourselves. We've done all of the work on our own. It is nowhere near up to the par that it needs to be for the demand that we're looking to hit. So we're also really excited because as soon as we close our fundraising round, then we're really going to be able to turn Zero into exactly what we picture it to be from a branding standpoint, a platform standpoint, and then also a brand standpoint having the capacity to bring them all on.
Nice. But people are actually buying clothing on this already, right? With these 30 brands, it's functioning. And
yes, it's functioning for the most part. Every once in a while, we'll shut it down for a month and try out a different API software or something like that. But for the most part, it's usually up and functioning.
And then where did this come from for you guys? We sort of touched on it, but tell me how Zero, what's the origin story for both of you?
Living in coastal cities, I feel like we had such an affinity for the environment. Brigitte can tell you a little bit about her life living in Northern California, but at least for me, I was always outside with my brother and my sister. In fifth grade, I had a sustainability class, and they gave us a list of 100 different ways that we can live a more sustainable lifestyle. And so one of those tasks on there was to put a bucket in your shower and to grab all the wastewater and then to water your plants with it. So my mom gave me a bucket. I put it in my shower. I probably ended up killing the plants because all of my shampoo and conditioner was in that bucket. But I would run throughout the house with my bucket, bring it downstairs, and then put it in the plants. And later my mom made me stop that. But yeah, always had a deep affinity for the environment and for nature. And my aunt was a celebrity stylist, so I became really interested in fashion. In one of my internships, I started learning about how detrimental the fashion industry was on the environment. And that was a very devastating realization for me. And so it was in that moment that I wanted to change my consumption habits. And then when I started to do so, I realized that the pieces that I thought were sustainable weren't actually as sustainable as I thought. And that was pretty heartbreaking. And so that's how the idea came to be. Brigitte and I became really good friends at USC, and she had all of the environmental expertise. So when I brought this up to her, she was like, let's do it. And yeah, that's from my end. But Brigitte, if you want to talk about a little bit about.
Yes, of course. As Ellie mentioned, I'm from Northern California. I'm from Half Moon Bay. So I grew up in a very isolated, pristine community where I thought, every natural environment was respected and gorgeous. I actually committed to USC pretty early on in high school because I played beach volleyball. And so towards the end of high school, I was just I need something new. So I went to Asia for a month alone. And when I was there, it was the first time really getting out of my bubble. And I was obviously exposed to the fact that the way things happen in Half Moon Bay is not the same way that waste management and everything happens elsewhere in the world. So that was super jarring for me. And I came back home and became obsessed with environmental stuff. And so Ellie and I actually was exposed to sustainable fashion the first time. During college, I moved to Africa for a while and was going to University of Cape Town. And I met this woman who had a clothing line made out of organic cotton. And I had never thought about fashion as a leading contributor to any of these issues. So at the time, then COVID hit, I was coming home, I was like working at an environmental law firm and just felt this insane disconnect of like the work I was doing every day. And then I'd go out with my friends, like what Ellie was saying, and they'd just be buying from Amazon, all this stuff. And I'm like, the issue's right in front of me. It's not these papers that I'm writing for this law firm. It's just felt very out of touch, but also like we were in a unique opportunity and a unique space because Ellie and I do know how to engage with very consumption obsessed people. It's the world that we were brought up in, but we also have this ability to like relate to the larger environmental issue behind it. So Ellie was working on Zero and I was just living at home, feeling underworked during COVID. And I was like, are you working on this? Do you need help? And so then I joined on and we've just been working on it together ever since.
That's great. It's interesting hearing you guys describe this like origin story and the early influence that like the idea of sustainability has had on you. Like, is that something common sort of among your peers? What percentage of your peers actually care about sustainability? Curious.
I don't know. Like they definitely care. I don't know if it's something that they think about when they purchase things or if it's something that they care about, solving themselves or helping out themselves. That sounds bad because like they care, but they're not going to do anything about it.
Mine is worse. Mine is like, I find that my Northern California friends get it in a way that my Southern California friends just don't. Like when I came to USC, I was shocked at the way people consume. It was something I'd never seen in my life. Like I'd never been exposed to Amazon or all these food delivery things. I've never seen any of that. And then being in Southern California, I felt super overwhelmed by it all. So my answer might be, depending on where people are from, it seems to be a different disconnect, but also don't want to offend my Southern Californian friends. USC was really, for me, really eye-opening the first few years. It was super hard to adjust to that element of it. It was just like a new way of people engaging with the world and spending money that I was not exposed to before that.
And at least for me, I wanted to work in an industry where I felt fulfilled. And fashion was really not doing that in any aspect. And yeah, I feel like that was also like a main driver for me is like every single day I was just not feeling fulfilled. I felt like I wasn't doing something that was bettering our world. And that took a toll on me.
That's another interesting point. Like among your peers, same kind of question, like what percentage of your peers are interested in or are not interested in, are prioritizing something like having a purpose over just making money? Because I come from a different generation where like the standard ethos that we had drilled into our heads was like, you need to get rich as fast as possible. And like meaning and purpose was something like kind of on the back burner. But it sounds like there's been sort of a sea change. But what do you think?
Oh, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I would say a majority of my friends are super hyper fixated on making sure that they're working in something that inspires them. Like they're not as money oriented as they are like seeing their career as an extension of who they are.
For my friends who I met at USC, they probably work in spaces that are more profit driven. But for the majority of my friends, like some of my friends who went to Stanford, my home friends, I think that they're more purpose driven.
We have a lot of friends who are entrepreneurs and have been successful already, and they're so young. And I think that USC just creates this different type of hustle out of people where they really get after the things that they want to have happen.
This conversation is so interesting because it's bringing me back to like my own childhood where there was a period of time where the ozone layer was going to go away and we were all going to get, skin cancer or whatever the heck was supposed to happen at that point. And then I remember we had like singers come to our elementary school and sing songs about recycling and stuff. And so like,
and I think it's so important for kids, especially like Nick, like your kids at their age. I feel like it's so important to learn about sustainability. And that's really what piqued my interest at first. And I feel like kids are just so empathetic.
But also crazy, going off of what we were saying earlier, that from a young age, you have people coming in and putting the responsibility on you with recycling, as opposed to the responsibility being put on these large companies who are creating all these products that eventually will need to be thrown out or recycled. Not that there's obviously ignorance is not bliss. You need to know what to do with the end of life of a product, but it's just so crazy how like the initial dialogue, you're brought into it feeling individual responsibility.
Right. And yeah, going off of that, Brigitte, though, it's really exciting because we are seeing a decline in sales from these fast fashion companies like Shein. Like Shein in the past year, their valuation dropped from $100 billion to $64 billion. And that was just within a year. So I think like this is definitely the time to create businesses in this space and really push for regulation.
Yeah, as I was thinking about this interview, like not only does fashion have an ESG, but like sort of the whole like beauty industrial complex has like a massive ESG problem, right? Because don't they do like animal testing? Like, so you have the supply chain and the waste, but then you also have this whole testing problem, and people are starting to get into it or get smart about it. But I still feel like it's endemic, like it's everywhere.
There's been a lot of change happening across all other industries, which is why Ellie and I feel like Zero's positioned really well right now, like from automotive to food to beauty. Even though beauty is really slow behind, there's a lot of change happening, and clean beauty is the new horizon. There was recently an acquisition of Ilia, which is like a clean beauty company, and it was acquired by, I might butcher this, but it was Clarins, Ellie, like a large beauty company that bought this clean beauty that to us really speaks to the fact that like they know clean beauty is super relevant and it's what consumers are now after. And so sadly it is up to, there she is, shameless plug right there.
I really like only wear Ilia, so it's funny that you just brought them up.
But it just like really speaks to how sadly it is consumer demand and consumer interest that really changes the way that these industries operate. And so now clean beauty is starting to be on the horizon. Volvo is an example that Ellie and I reference a lot when we're pitching, because Volvo's now pledged to only produce electric vehicles by 2030. We would have never expected this out of a car company, but it's just the new, with the government regulation coming in and all this consumer expectation, it's kind of the new wave. And so we're really predicting that fashion has kind of been the last industry to avoid this. But as Ellie mentioned earlier, there's regulation coming across Europe, and there's been a lot of greenwashing lawsuits in the US. So we really know that like fashion is about to get hit with the heat that all these other industries have been.
Yeah, going off of the clean beauty, that's definitely something that we're interested in adding on Zero at some point. We just want to be like the one-stop shop for sustainable anything.
Yeah, that seems like you would want that naturally. Like even jewelry, honestly, like jewelry has the ESG problem, right? Because like where do they source the stuff? Are their children being exploited?
Yeah, there's this amazing brand that actually that upcycles computer parts, because there's silvers and golds within computer parts, and they make it into jewelry, and it's so cool. Like everyone's getting very innovative, and I'm excited for the future.
You mentioned these ESG lawsuits. These lawsuits are they in the European Union or something? Or like what are the nature of these lawsuits?
I don't have this top of mind exactly where they are, but I'm pretty sure the Nike one and the Gucci one are happening in the US, the lawsuits.
Yeah, and also Allbirds. Allbirds is a brand that deems to be sustainable, and they're in a huge greenwashing.
And is it like a false advertising? Like basically like, hey, you're advertising as being sustainable, but you're actually not, and you're lying to consumers. I mean, because there are no are there ESG laws on the books in the US related to fashion? I don't think there are,
There's
but
none that
maybe there are.
Intense. It's very lax.
So Allbirds is a class action lawsuit because the company like was misleading consumers about its environmental impact.
Which is also sad because when you think about it, Allbirds has been doing a really good job with what they've been creating. They've been doing a lot better job than the Nikes of the world, but unfortunately it is a sustainable company that gets the backlash. Not saying that they shouldn't, because they are still misleading customers, which is part of the issue. But it just is interesting how as soon as you try to emerge as someone who is doing the correct thing, I feel like you're almost hyper-focused on to really make a minor error so that people can say, oh, no, that's not the way it should be done.
That's interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the fashion industry in general, because it's a huge business, obviously, and it's perennial, and it's every season, like it's like 4 times a year or something, there's a new batch of clothing come out. And like let's go through all of the different ESG problems in the industry. Like one thing I saw, I forget whose podcast it was on. It may have been Joe Rogan, actually. He like found some picture of a gigantic heap of used clothing that had gotten shipped to Africa or something. Like basically it was like waste clothing or something like that. So obviously like there's a production issue, but let's go through them. Like what in your mind is going on that's not working or not good for the environment?
There is a huge fashion waste problem specifically. And so say you donate clothing to Goodwill, and they only take a small selection of that and actually put it in their stores. And I'm not saying like Goodwill is the only company that does this, but a lot of the times the excess amount of clothing gets sent to the global south for other third world countries to deal with. And so that is a huge issue. That's a reason why Bridget and I are really fond of the idea of upcycling and using dead stock fabric to kind of create this circularity within fashion and be able to reuse fabrics that are already in existence versus using new ones.
What is dead stock fabric?
So dead stock fabric is fabric that's been produced and then it's excess. So a lot of times companies like Gucci, for example, they'll have a ton of their fabric made and then they won't end up using it all, but it's been ordered for them and it exists. So a lot of times what a brand will do is they'll go to throw it away because then they think they think of it as like a currency. So if someone else has access to their fabric, obviously if it's a branded fabric, it's one example, but there's a lot of fabrics that aren't branded that still companies try to get rid of because it creates, once again, this like demand supply issue. So they just try to eliminate it so there's no excess. And so, but it's really cool because there's been a lot of factory warehouses and stuff that have emerged that are starting to only have dead stock. So they'll create relationships with these companies and keep it really hush-hush of where they're sourcing it from. But then another designer can come in and buy this textile that's already been produced for a different designer.
Okay, interesting. Okay, keep going. So we have the general sort of supply chain problem, which is like there's a ton of waste, and it sounds like the waste is going all over the place, ending up in different parts of the world. Okay, what else is going on?
Something that really sticks out to me is this obsession with newness. Like as a consumer, I'm led to believe that I always need something new, and that, for instance, if my pants break or something, that just means I need a new pair. Also seasonality that comes into play where I'm always programmed to think like I need a new outfit for a new season or I need a new outfit for a new trend. It's just this hyperfixation with like nothing I have will ever be enough. So I need to keep buying more until I eventually reach this state of happiness. But obviously that state's never coming because once I get there, I'll be sold a new product that will improve my life.
Yeah, you guys have mentioned this idea several times, both of you in this conversation, which I think is super interesting. I'm like, the extent to which our culture is obsessed with consumption and how that's driving sort of not only consumer behavior, like just thinking about the economics, but it's a psychological thing too, right? Like these are sort of people are playing on the desires of people, and it's really bad on these like social media technologies where they're like you're like scrolling and it's like, oh, here's like Instagram will serve me up the craziest stuff. Like it knows I'm into martial arts, so it shows me like these like Japanese kimonos and stuff that I need to buy. But it's happening all over the world. Yeah.
Yeah, Nick, there's actually this new app that Bridget and I talk about a lot. It's called Flip, and it's essentially TikTok, but to sell products as well. So if I have a Flip account, they'll send me product and then I can make videos and review them. And then they'll send me just more product. And so they had this really interesting marketing campaign when they launched where you can send someone an invitation to join Flip. And then it will give you guys both like a range of like $100 to like $160 in product. I don't know how their business model works, whether they work with PR companies or they do exclusive like collaborations with these companies, but Bridget and I both signed up and I had $160 worth of product that I could place an order. And then they suggested that if I make a video, I can even get more money on top of that. Every single video is just them promoting product and it's insane. I've never seen a social media app like that in my life. Like even on TikTok, like once in a while, an ad comes up, but like every single video is like a sales marketing scheme.
Yeah, it's crazy though, because across all these different social media platforms, from like TikTok to Instagram to Flip, I feel like there's been this new wave of everyone's aspiring to have this similar image, whether it's through like plastic surgery, clothing, whatever, and this one vision of what success looks like. And so now all these brands can really easily monetize on this because they find someone who's deemed like ideal in society and then just pump money into making it seem like their product is what got someone there. But obviously we know that at the end of the day, like a skincare product or a piece of clothing I wear isn't going to make me into this ideal human being. And especially with celebrities, it gets really difficult in my opinion, because a singer or something will promote something and I'm never going to be this famous celebrity because I dress like them. But it's made it really easy for these fast fashion companies and all of these beauty brands to just come in and really kind of clog up everything that we're seeing and make us think that we can really shop our way into being something else.
Right. And I think that's a conversation that Bridget and I often have, just creating a company that's consumer facing. And at the end of the day, in order to grow, we need to sell clothing on our website. And so that's something we often talk about because it's kind of like an inner dilemma. Like we need to make sales, but at the same time, like sustainability is at the core of all of our values. So what does that look like? And how do we do this in an authentic way? And how do we grow and scale, but with sustainability in mind?
I'm going to say, Ellie and I like joke about it as well, as a lot of times what people do is they'll like panic purchase. So like if one of our friends is going on a first date or something like that, and they're super nervous and they'll be like, oh my God, I need to get an outfit because there's this idea that I'll get an ideal outfit and then everything will go smoothly. So we're also really trying to figure out of like how to communicate through our marketing, our PR and everything, this need to like move away from a panic purchase and more so think about a piece and think about the longevity behind it. So we're super keen to like move away from crazy prints or just like trend oriented things that I'll buy and then in a month I'll see a photo of myself in it and be like, that is embarrassing. So really thinking through like how can we create this demand in this platform for consumers that almost isn't like feeding off of insecurity and this desire to be a part of like the now, but rather people see it as a long-term purchase and something that they really want to add to their closet.
It's tough. Like this whole equation is tough because business side of you wants to say, let's just sell as many, let's vet them. Let's make sure they're all sustainable on our metrics, but let's sell as many of them as you can. But then there's this generalized sort of waste problem, which maybe there are ways to get at the waste problem, which is like to recycle everything. But what happens like if I throw this shirt, instead of doing it to Goodwill, if I throw it into the recycling bin in LA, what happens to it?
I mean, I would assume that shirt probably has some form of synthetic material in it. It's probably not 100% cotton or organic cotton. So it will probably slowly deteriorate. But then the little shreds and the microplastics and the fibers living in that shirt will stay on Earth and stay here longer than you will be here. So that's the issue with this stuff is like this material is super durable and it's been created in a way that it cannot break down and it can't naturally go back into the environment and kind of create this feedback loop that we're used to.
But it doesn't go like something like this, if not sort of put back into the circular economy, if it put into one of the bins, it goes into a landfill or something, it doesn't automatically get filtered or something like that.
Recycling is really interesting. We love this brand called Ridwell, this company called Ridwell. It's really interesting because the founder of it started it with his little son. They were what were they doing? They were looking for batteries, Bridget, or they had all of these batteries that were old and they didn't know what to do with them. And they realized that if they recycled them, it wasn't going to actually be recycled. So they ended up bringing it to this facility that was like 3 hours away. And then what they started doing is they started collecting all of their neighbors' batteries. And so every month or so, they would go to the facility 3 hours away and bring it to the facility that they know would properly recycle the batteries. And so now they expanded, they do textiles, they do, any electronic gear, and they've just scaled. But it shows you that even just putting something in the recycled bin actually probably won't properly recycle. Even in my building here, my apartment complex, we have 2 chutes and one's for recycling and one's for landfill. And then one day I went down to bring down a larger package. And then I saw that they were both just being funneled to the same exact trash bin. So that's like a larger issue. Maybe that's another issue, Bridget, and I will try to tackle one day.
Yeah, that's just like lazy. Someone's being lazy.
Yeah. But it's really crazy to think about because I feel like the scope of these issues, it's hard for us to comprehend. Like the shirt that you're wearing has plastic in it. And when we think about plastic, we're like, there's plastic in the ocean, there's plastic everywhere, but they'll remove it. But the issue is it won't just be removed because we're creating more of it every day. So it will just continue to stack up until eventually our world is quite literally plastic filled. Like I just watched WALL-E for the first time last week, but I was watching and having this out of body experience of being like, this is actually what the future could look like if we just continue to consume and create in the way that we currently are, because eventually our world will just be overfilled with trash and everything that we're putting on it. There's nowhere for it to go unless they burn it. And then when they're burning it, you're burning plastic and all of these harsh chemicals into the air. And what is that going to do for our ecosystem and everything that's already a complete mess? And it's really freaky to think about, because I feel like we just always assume there's a solution ahead, but there isn't. We really have to change the way that we're creating products and the way that we're engaging with them and then discarding of them.
Yeah. And also it sounds like the mindset, like the generalized consumer mindset, which is problematic because the governments of the world have basically staked their reputation on GDP growth. The problem with GDP growth is you need to buy more stuff to create more GDP. And so to get the kind of change, which feels like is probably necessary with the billions of people we have on Earth, we basically need a new metric to judge the economy rather than like I think about like the car industry is sort of ahead of fashion in a sense in the sustainability because it's been incentivized by government programs and people have been paying attention to it because of the oil and stuff. But even cars, like they build these cars to fail. And like that's a feature of our meta system. Like our system is incentivizing repeat consumption over and over at all levels. Like CEOs are incentivized, consumers are tricked and advertised to do all this. But it starts from the top, and to change that would be pretty difficult. But maybe that's what we need to do.
It's really scary because planned obsolescence is in every industry. Like Apple's a great example, fast fashion companies where they literally design clothing to be a trend and to then deteriorate within a couple months, that you have to keep doing these repeat purchases. It's really freaky to think about because obviously these companies realize if we create this circular loop, it actually might not be as profitable as we're able to do right now, where we're just kind of like exploiting this consumer mindset that currently exists.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This episode of the Nick Halaris Show is brought to you by Metros Capital. If you're an investor looking for direct access to real estate investments, then we'd love to talk with you. Investment opportunities at Metros Capital balance financial returns and community impact. To learn more, contact us at metros.nickhalaris.com. Again, that's metros.nickhalaris.com. Now let's get back to the episode. It strikes me that fashion also has a sourcing problem because where does all this stuff come from and who, like what countries? Like I feel like you hear these countries repeatedly, like Turkey, for example, or like where does cotton come from? And it seems like that's another big challenge. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really difficult because a lot of these plants aren't being grown where they're native to. So then it creates this water stress issue and all of these just like compounding issues that come from trying to meet a demand that's unrealistic with what our like natural world can really support. And so obviously a lot of this is exported to countries where they know that there's cheaper labor and it will be a cheaper cost to grow everything. But then because of that, people's lives are just being compromised in order to make a cheap shirt for me to buy a crop top at Forever 21 for $10.
Yeah, it's really horrible, the labor aspect of it all as well. Like Shein workers make, I think, $14 a day or less. And then if they mess up a garment, that like gets deducted from their daily wages. It's just insane to think about how detached everyone is from their clothing. Like people are fully aware that this is happening, and yet they still continue to purchase from these large fast fashion companies. And like at that point, I do have a little bit of an issue, Brigitte, and with consumers. And I feel like at that point, once you are aware of what's going on, you should try to shift in the best way you can. A lot of the times people tend to say that sustainable fashion is super expensive and therefore they can only shop fast fashion. And you can still shop from secondhand brands like Depop and Poshmark and buy a Shein top, but it's almost better to just buy it from someone else who had previously purchased it rather than, purchasing directly from the website.
Yeah, that's another response to this problem, right? Like what's that company in our neighborhood, the Real?
Yeah.
Sort of attempting to create a circular economy, which is like, hey, let's not just discard these things, let's resell them and use them. But the wages, so the labor was my last topic that I feel like is worth talking about, because not only do you have the agricultural labor stuff, but it sounds like the manufacturing itself is an issue. And I know some companies have attempted to sort of reshore and produce clothing profitably in the United States, but it's been challenging. Like there was a company based in LA that sort of failed famously called American Apparel that was doing stuff. But it sounds like it's still sort of hard for these companies to profitably sell this clothing, even while sort of moving around and outsourcing, going to Vietnam or going to this place. Like what's the dynamic in the market, labor market look like for fashion?
I mean, I think that that's a really interesting conversation because just because something's made in America doesn't necessarily mean it's better. I think what the issue is that when things do get exported and we're out in Vietnam making all this clothing, then unfortunately people don't factor in like the cost of living and everything that has to go with that. So there's a lower wage, which might just have to do with the area in which the product is being made. But also then these people are exploited because since they can be paid a cheaper wage, there's no attention paid to like their cost of living, what actually needs to go into it. So it's interesting because it obviously makes sense that people want to send their product where they're going to get the cheapest labor. And then figuring out what is this dynamic of, okay, the labor is cheaper, but these people are also being paid what they need to be paid to sustain themselves. As opposed to obviously if something's being made in Los Angeles, the cost of living in Los Angeles is super high. So it's going to cost a ton to make a product here. So it's just really figuring out like where can we create a product, but also have the people that are making it supported. And I think that just comes down to the attention to detail from a brand to really make sure that you're only working with factories where they're actually taking into account the human lives making the pieces, as opposed to just finding the cheapest factory, throwing all your product there, never going to look at it and just hoping that, you don't have a big factory collapse like what happened in Bangladesh or something like that holds you accountable.
But I also just, we have a brand on our website called Oddly, and the two founders actually went to Stanford, and all of their manufacturing has been downtown, and they've seen just so many benefits just having their manufacturer live locally because they go to the manufacturer every single day. They know the people who are making clothing. They're able to spotlight them on their social media and kind of put faces to who's creating clothing. So I think there's a lot of benefits, although it might be a little bit more costly. I think there's a lot of benefits in creating pieces locally.
It's just all about oversight and like being able to see into your supply chain and see how things are happening. Because I think when companies get really big and they just see their company as purely numbers, they have no care for what's happening in the factory. They just have a care for where can we get the cheapest labor. So it's really cool with a brand like Oddly because they do have this attention to both and they want to produce things locally so that they can go and engage and see the conditions that are happening.
And it's nice that they prioritize all of these things at the inception so that as they scale, they're able to scale responsibly versus a brand that outsources everything in Turkey. Like it's hard to scale and then go back and try to make something sustainably and ethically minded.
I know that a few smaller brands, as they do get higher demand and need to create more product, they are looking to start outsourcing to another country. But like what Ellie was saying, since sustainability has been with them from the very beginning, from the creation of their brand, they have this insight of like communication that should happen with their manufacturer, what transparency should look like. So then when they do move abroad, they're able to find a factory that aligns. Because just because someone's making a product abroad doesn't mean that the factory isn't sustainable, doesn't mean that it's up to par. There's just a different level of diligence that needs to take place since you're not able to go and check in on them as frequently as you could if they were, say, based in LA.
Crazy market. Like I have to believe that like Donatella Versace or they have to know about this problem. Like, are they speaking publicly about all these issues and what are they saying? I'm curious.
Not as freely as they should be, because this is also the issue. People assume luxury, since it's expensive, that luxury is better than fast fashion. But a lot of times they're finding that it's made at the same factory and everything. Luxury is just priced higher, but it's not the people at the bottom of the supply chain who are benefiting from it. It's only the margins at the people at the top who own the brands that are. Not to say Versace, I don't know their supply chain directly, but it is a really crazy concept that like luxury does not necessarily mean better quality and better wages for everyone.
Right. And I feel like sustainability within the larger fashion companies is just always avoided within interviews. The only luxury brand that I'm aware of that has some sustainability focus is Stella McCartney. And she's really the only person who touches upon sustainability.
I see, like she's advertising about it and talking about it.
Yeah.
Publicly. Yeah.
Yeah. I just don't think that these creative directors and founders want attention around sustainability towards their company because I'm sure they're aware that they'll receive backlash.
But I kind of disagree slightly with that because there has been a lot of like Gucci and Hermes and all these big brands are starting to try to like use alternative leathers and stuff like that. So they're starting to dive in because they're seeing that customer demand heading in that direction. They're just kind of what Ellie's saying. They're not taking these like large claims and having Vogue publish an article about how they're 100% committed to sustainability now. I think that they're slowly dipping their toes in it and trying to get comfortable with it because they know that that's really where consumer demand is going.
I feel like most brands try to do like sustainability capsules or like Brigitte said, try to just remove all animal leather. That's usually what a bunch of these luxury brands have been starting with. But it's nice to see that, they're starting somewhere.
I read a book. I was thinking about it during this conversation. There's this famous book. I think it's called Gomorrah, and it's about like the area in Naples where there are all those mafia situations and like incredible violence. And the journalist who wrote the book, he made the claim that like a huge percentage of the Italian products, this was like in the early 2000s, were produced with like mafia style controlled labor. And it was really eye-opening. I forget the exact, it's been like 10 years since I read the book, but it might be worth checking out.
Yeah. There's also, we learned recently that a lot of like Italian leather is actually just sourced from the Amazon. And so they'll like clean cut the Amazon, have all the cows live there, and then just send the leather to Italy. And then it's branded as Italian leather and we see it as a luxury and blah, blah, blah. It's just crazy how like a small wording, people instantly assume something is like well-made quality luxury, but the actuality of it can be so different.
I can't even imagine. Like, I feel like the fashion industry, in a sense, from a labor and from a quality control standpoint, is like the Wild West, right? Because you could go anywhere. Like, you could go to a market in China, or even you could go downtown LA and buy like a Gucci bag that is obviously not a Gucci bag, but like only like a discerning consumer would really know the difference. So this stuff is being produced. No one's tracking it.
Yeah, I watched this TikTok. There were these Bottega Veneta earrings that went viral. They're like teardrop and silver. And I watched this TikTok of this girl and she was like, guys, Bottega Veneta dupe. You can get these on Amazon. And she looked at the composition of what the earrings were made out of. And they were literally made out of the exact same material. The Bottega Veneta ones, I think, are just like dipped in silver. The Bottega Veneta ones are like $1,500. And then the Amazon ones are like 10.
It's crazy. Yeah. One of my conspiracy theories is that one day, how the luxury companies have all been relying on China to fuel their growth?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One day the CCP is just going to be like, no more luxury items in China. And that business is going to go to zero or something. I don't know why I think that, but like, I just know like that's where all their growth has been coming from. Like, yeah. I have a friend who works at, he's a pretty high up exec at Chrome Hearts. And that's all their growth is Asia. Like they're doing fine in America and Europe, and Vegas is a good store for them. But like Asia is where big money's happening.
Yeah, that's like Justin Bieber's brand, Drew House. Majority of their growth is all from Asia.
Well, Ellie, Brigitte, this has been a super fascinating conversation. Thanks for the time. I'm going to include links and stuff in my email when I send it out to our listeners. But tell us, at least so people listening can hear, where can people find Zero and you all on the internet?
Yeah, so our website is shopzero.co and our Instagram is shopzeroofficial. And I'll send you over those links to add in. Okay,
good. Well, thank you both for your time. This has been a great discussion. I look forward to, watching the progress for Zero on the fundraise and seeing what kind of good you can do in that industry. It sounds like it's like something that's very necessary for this economy going forward. So best of luck to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for being so supportive.
Of course. Thank you for listening to the Nick Halaris Show. We hope you enjoyed the episode and would appreciate your help with spreading the word by sharing with your network on social. And until next time, remember, it's not about pursuing success to unlock fulfillment. It's about learning how to find fulfillment in the midst of success.